It's been really interesting, again, going from reader to author on that, because when I was a bookstagrammer and stuff, I reviewed books, constantly. I reviewed books on my platform and shared those reviews and things. And, for the most part, like I tried to keep a lot of it pretty positive, and I know myself pretty well and what I like to read. So I'm less likely to end up with a book that I'm really not going to, jive with. Then as I've moved more towards being an author, I don't publicly review books any longer, because if an author wants me to critique their work, they'll ask me to do so because I'm an author. So it's a little bit harder to do that now, like, because it feels a little bit more like you're, critiquing a coworker versus it just being just reading for pleasure.
You're listening to Lemons Listening Library. Discover the story behind the stories with unique and raw conversations from the people who make your favorite books a reality. Welcome to this episode of Lemons Listening Library. I am Randie Lemons, fantasy author, or RL Rose, to those of you in the romance community. Today we have a super exciting guest. She's gone through a lot of different transitions in the book world, and I'm excited to touch base on all those different things. But before we introduce her, I have to do a little bit of housekeeping. I would like to remind our listeners to head over to our YouTube channel and comment on each episode that you listen to, like it, share it, and leave us a review on your podcast platform. Whatever one you're listening to us on, make sure you give us a review on those. We are on all of them. It's one of the most helpful ways that you can support our show, and it's super quick and easy. We also have advertising spots available where we create commercials and broadcast them across all of our platforms, as well as give you the commercials to use however you see fit. If you'd like more information on this, please email us at lemonslisteninglibrary@gmail.com, and we will get you hooked up on all the information regarding that. Lastly, go follow us on all of our social media platforms. Again, you can find us on all of them by searching Lemons Listening Library, and let us know what you think, what your favorite episode is, what you want to see, or who you want to see us talk to next. It's a great way to keep up with our community. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for. I would like to welcome the brilliant J.A. Forde. Did I say that correctly?
You did, yes.
Yay! Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yes. So I'm a newer author. I am an indie author, so I publish my books independently. And I'm a military spouse. I'm a stay-at-home mom. And so I've lived in a bunch of different places, kind of been all over the place. And um, I'm an avid traveler. I love to travel. I love to read. An avid reader. That's been a big piece of bringing me into, this side of the book world, and becoming an author is just how much I've always loved books and reading. And so I'm always happy to just talk books with somebody for hours. So yeah, doing podcasts and just being able to talk about books is one of my favorite things. So yeah,
Have
I'm
you
so
had
glad to have you.
anyone tell you that you look like Rebecca Yarros?
No, really? I'm
As
like,
soon
oh.
as you said that you were a military, it just connected in my brain that, oh my gosh, you kind of look like your Rebecca Yarros.
I just need the pink hair, and like maybe I could do like a,
Or like a cameo for her, like a
yeah.
girl, you
That's
could do it. I'd
awesome.
believe it. All right,
Love it.
Rebecca Yarros, thank you for joining Lemons Listening Library. I'm so glad you're here.
Yeah. Oh, that's so funny. I love it.
Yeah, nope, that's everyone's gonna say that now. You're gonna hear that all the time.
I love that so much. It's hilarious. I'm like, oh, that's like such a compliment. Like, wow.
Right, yeah. So you mentioned that you were a bookstagrammer first, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I joined Bookstagram in 2022 when I just really was burnt out on social media of like all kinds. Like it just felt very negative, and there was just nothing about social media that brought me joy. And really, the only accounts that I was enjoying at that time were Bookstagram accounts and people just talking about books. And so I followed several, and then I started following more of them and was reading more and more because I was getting all of these great recommendations. And I decided, I think I want to do this because it's just a part of the internet that I actually want to be a part of, as opposed to wanting to run away from it. And so I started a Bookstagram account in 2022, and it just opened my eyes so much to so much within like the book world that I had no idea even existed, which was just so neat. Like, not only just lots of new traditionally published authors, but it really introduced me to independent publishing and the amount of just truly incredible authors that are in that sphere. And then just so many books that I had never heard of, and started forming connections and like real friendships with these people on the internet, which is so weird because, like, when you're growing up, they're like, don't talk to people on the internet, it's not safe.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, some of my best friends I met on the internet, which is hilarious. But
Right, yeah.
it just was such a great community. And it was something that I just needed so badly at that time in my life when just everything was so crazy in the early 2020s with COVID and just everything else, that it was just such a like breath of fresh air for me. Um, and it was just incredible. And I just absolutely loved that. Yeah.
Did you have before you like got to see indie authors and their process and connect with them more, did you have a different viewpoint on indie authors and like what kind of content you're going to get from their books or what um quality you're going to get from indie author books? Did you have a different viewpoint on that before?
Because I had never really read anything from an indie author prior to Bookstagram, as I started seeing more and more of them, I was like, I kind of wonder, what the deal is with this. And you can definitely see where like there are some people who like they won't read indie authors because they don't know if it's going to be the same quality as traditionally published, and there definitely is that stigma, but I feel like it's changing a lot now as people understand like that part of the industry so much more and see just how some of these authors are putting out such high quality work. So when I started going in, like I started requesting advanced copies from some of these authors as they would post them. And so I would go in and I'd request an advanced copy and I'd read them. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, these are such great books and they should be celebrated just like so many of these others. And so I became such a huge proponent of indie authors. Like, I love my indies. I have like a whole shelf in my office that is all of my indie books because there's so many out there and they're so wonderfully written and they're so wonderfully done and they're just very underhyped in a lot of circumstances, but it's getting better. Like, you see more and more of them getting traction and getting traditionally published because the publishers are even starting to really see that these indie authors have so much to offer. And so it's really amazing to see how much it's changed even just in the last 2.5 3 years, um, to see just how many indie authors are getting picked up by traditional publishers, how many of them are getting just huge traction and have so many readers that love them. And it's just really changing, which is really neat to see.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're 100% right on that. I think, before a lot of when we would query for agents and things like that, if you had published your book, they weren't interested in it. They weren't
Hmm.
like it's still something that, if you don't have a lot of traction, you don't have a lot of readers, it's going to be really hard to pitch to an agent. But now it's really starting to change to where that's not just a straight no anymore. They will take a look
Yeah.
at it.
Yeah, it is definitely starting to change. Or like, I've seen authors where, they'll query with agents with like a new book, but then the publishers will see how well their other series have done or their other books, and they'll pick those up as well. Which is just it's so fun to watch and like see some of these people that, they worked so hard on these books and to get them out there. And then to like see that pay off in this way is like, it's really neat. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think the space of authors, and you mentioned it a little bit before too, like uh indie writing there for a little while it was kind of just this, back alley, let's just get our work out there, but now people are starting to really take it serious of like this can be my route to, becoming
Yeah.
a big famed author, and it doesn't have to be just the people who are, going the roundabout way to get published. It's actually becoming just this new path. It's not the
Yeah.
roundabout way anymore. It's you can pick traditional or you can pick self-publishing, and the quality in many of them are so comparable.
Yeah. And like, it's like with so many things. You can find traditionally published books that aren't going to be a good fit, or that, don't feel like they had the time or effort put into them. And that happens in all, walks. But you see so many people now where it's like, I really take a lot of pride in the amount of time that I put into my writing, in hiring, very good editors and cover artists, because I wanted to produce something that was high quality, that could, like, that would be on the same level as, the amount of effort, the amount of time being put into it as traditionally published books. I didn't want to cut corners, because I think that's something that sometimes, like, a misconstrued thing too, is that, in indie publishing, that it'll be like, oh, like, they're just doing it to be able to do it fast, and it's to cut those corners. And that's not necessarily the case. Like, that may have been the case years ago, but like now, indie authors are really, they're putting in the work, they're putting in the effort, they're doing all of the same things that traditionally published authors are doing. They're going multiple rounds with editors, they're doing all the things to make sure that they're putting out a quality book. And and that's finally really getting seen, I think, amongst
Yeah.
readers, and now with publishers too, being like, oh, like, this is actual, like, competition to a degree, like, where they're starting to realize, like, oh, like, there is competition from these indie published authors, for us. So it's pretty interesting to see that change.
Yeah, yeah. And you've got to see, so going from a reader to an ARC reader and a beta reader, what was that like? Because I imagine that's still a new process for you of like you started off with just consuming the finished product and now you get to see like before it's released.
Yeah. Yeah. So beta reading was huge for me. I, connected with some indie authors kind of early on in my journey, where we became friends, and they were writing. And I had one that came to me and was like, hey, would you read this for me and give me feedback, before it goes to my editor and stuff? And I was like, oh, that sounds great. Like, I would love to do that. And so I did that. And it was so neat to, be able to say, because this is before the book is out. So if there's something where you're like, oh, like, I think if if you did this, it would make this moment so much stronger. Or if you, said this, and like, being able to give some of that feedback, and that they're not necessarily going to take everything that you say, but just being able to be a part of that process and see it from, the other side. And then, especially then, like, once those books come out, and then you get to like read the final product, and sometimes you see things where you're like, oh, that was my idea that they like were able to incorporate. And it just makes you feel that much more connected to, the art of that whole process, um, and everything. So it's so neat. And so I just fell in love with beta reading, and I started doing a lot more of it. Um, and that was really where I kind of had my first inkling of like, okay, like, being on this side of that page, on the writing side of it a little bit more. I was like, this is really cool. And, I wonder if this is something that I could do. Um, and it just really was eye opening for me on that.
Yeah, yeah. And so you describe yourself as someone who didn't think that you had a story to tell. Did that shift during the beta writing process? And how did you realize that you did have something to write?
Yeah, it did. And I think it really came from, you know, I've never been one of those people that had like that like passion from like when they were a kid of like, I want to do this when I grow up. It was always like I had different things that I thought about wanting to do. And I went to college, and I got a degree in marketing because that seemed like it would be
Oh, you've
useful.
got a
And
head start on all of us authors.
it's so funny because I got this degree in marketing, and realized after I got out of college that that generally equates to sales. And I was like, ugh, like, I hate sales. Like, sales is the worst, which is funny. Like, now that I like have to sell my book to people all the time, like,
You're
all
so
day, every
thankful
day.
for it.
So it is very helpful to have that background, but it's such a difference when you actually care about what you're selling. And I think that was
Right.
the
Yeah.
difference. Like, I took a couple of sales jobs after college, and I was like, this is terrible, because I didn't care about what I was trying to, like, it was a job, and it was what I was being told I had to sell. And I was like, I hate sales. Sales is the worst. And then, so I kind of went through a lot of different stages. I worked in a credit union for a while. I worked from home with like a fashion company for a while. I worked from home with a wellness company for a while, like when I was having kids and I just needed that flexibility. But there was just never anything that was like, this is it, like this is the thing that I was always meant to do, you know? And so then to kind of fall into this community of people where I felt really at home, just felt really like just like locked in and like this is a good place to be was really neat. And then to kind of start moving more and more towards that writing sphere and being like, I've never been a writer before, but this is just something that I would really like to try and like give myself an opportunity to do. I'm seeing all of these amazing people around me that, with when you look at like some of these really big name authors, and then it's kind of the same way as we do with like, movie stars and stuff, like they don't feel like normal people. Like
Right.
these are, you're like, they are so not like, I could never be like this, and then I started making friends with all of these authors and I was like, okay, like they're not so different
Wait, they're
than I am.
human like me?
They're real people. They're just like me. Like, and they found a way to tell stories and to, put something out into the world that they really cared about. And, maybe I can do that. And so, it just kind of made me start thinking, and I started just getting just like little ideas in my head where I was like, I wonder if I could write a story about that, or maybe I could write a story about this. And I would just make notes like in my phone and stuff. And so then it just kind of snowballed from there of like, maybe I want to try and do this. And it was just it's just been really, really neat to kind of see, that shift to like now having something in my life, having written two books and released two books. It's like this, like I have a thing that I love, that I'm super passionate about, that it brings me joy in all of its different stages. It's also very frustrating in some of its phases, but it brings me so much joy. Um, and it's just neat to finally like have that like thing, because you see so many people, they're like, this is what I've always wanted to do. And I was like, I've never had that. And to like finally find it is just like so, so cool. Um,
Yeah. What would you say like what would your percentage be on love it, hate it?
um, I would say it's probably like 80 to 90% love it, 10 to 20% hate it, depending on, what phase I'm in the publishing cycle,
Yeah.
and, how, if my characters are cooperating on that particular day.
Yeah.
And, there's definitely its moments where it's hard and it's frustrating, and especially when it comes to being indie published and, having to wear every hat and having to do the marketing and having to do all of the logistical stuff in the background and the admin. And, there's just a lot of things where you're like, I just want to write a book. I just want to sit down and write a book. Like, that's what I want to do. And you have to do so many other pieces that those things sometimes get a little exhausting, but you
Yeah.
push through and you do them, and it pays off. And so you're like, okay, that was worth it. Like it was worth all of that extra time and effort to do that because it pays off. But it's sometimes a little frustrating for sure.
Now that you have two books published, do you see how valuable like the Bookstagram world is? Are you like looking at other Bookstagrammers like, hey, would you review my book and put this up on your website?
Yeah, I mean, it's really been neat, and I was very fortunate in that like I went from Bookstagram to, author. And so I had so many connections to so many just really amazing people within that community. So as I slowly kind of made that transition over, I was able to lean into those friendships, and so many of them have been such amazing supporters for me, and being able to like, where they're like, yes, I will hype your book all day, every day. Like, you're so great. And so it's really been absolutely invaluable to have those connections in so many ways. Um, because it can be hard if you know, are a brand new author coming in and you don't have those connections, you're having to build them from the ground up. And so I definitely, recognize how much it helped being a bookstagrammer first and having those connections to kind of start out. Um, before I kind of moved over into, the author world, because having those connections is so helpful for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I like what you said too about the book community and it being kind of your safe space on the internet. And that's kind of what a lot of people have found in general with books too, is like that's
Mhm.
what a lot of people turn to as their safe space. And now there's a community of people that we can connect to online who also agree that like we can have the things that we like and not yuck other people's yums, and we're all just like cozy kosher with each other. This is really cool.
Yeah, I love, and I'm a big proponent of like, read the books that bring you joy, and like, it might not be the same book that brings me joy, and that's okay. Like, I'm not here to tell you not to read whatever it is that you want to read. If it makes you happy and you're reading, like, that's amazing. So and that was something that I really loved about Bookstagram, is like, reading in general is a solitary activity. You read a book and consume it, and it's a very solitary activity. And I think for a lot of people, being able to then do that in community in some way, like, whether it's actually reading the books together in terms of like book clubs or buddy reads and stuff, or if it's just being able to talk about them when somebody posts about it and being like, oh, I loved that book too. This is my favorite character, or whatever. Just like those little ways to connect something that, because I think there are a lot of readers that are introverts. And so to be able to connect with other people about something that they love without having to fully put themselves out there in a situation where they're like, this is very uncomfortable, like, they can still enjoy that, connection to people. And I loved that about Bookstagram, and being able to take something that's so solitary normally and turn it into a community, event to a degree. And that's just, it's such a neat space.
Yeah. I know I'm bouncing around here and going back to the reviewing
No,
process,
that's
but
good.
did you how did you feel about like one-star reviews, or how do you feel about review just not enjoying something, and what space is there for people to just generally give their opinion of like, yeah, I didn't like that.
You know, it's been really interesting, again, going from reader to author on that, because when I was a bookstagrammer and stuff, I reviewed books, constantly. I reviewed books on my platform and shared those reviews and things. And, for the most part, like, I tried to keep a lot of it pretty positive, and I know myself pretty well and what I like to read. So I'm less likely to end up with a book that I'm really not going to, jive with. And then as I've moved more towards being an author, I don't publicly review books any longer, because it's been kind of like a shift in terms of, if an author wants me to critique their work, they'll ask me to do so because I'm an author. So it's a little bit harder to do that now, like, because it feels a little bit more like you're, critiquing a coworker versus it just being just
Someone in a
reading
different
for
industry.
pleasure. Yeah. And so I still love to recommend books. I still talk about the books that I love all of the time, but it's shifted a little bit in terms of how I, you know review books. And I've also had to learn a lot of being on the author side, of understanding the difference between reader spaces and author spaces, and like places like Goodreads and like Storygraph, and even like, your Amazon reviews, and to a degree even Bookstagram, for like the accounts that are really focused on actually reviewing books. Like, those are reader spaces. Those are places where they're looking at the work and they're going to leave a review, and it's going to be based on what their opinion is. And that is amazing and it's wonderful. And that's where I started. And I appreciate that community so much. Um, I think where you kind of end up with some contention is when the two overlap, when sometimes readers want to bring their opinions into author spaces, like onto
Mhm.
authors' pages, or into their posts, and tell the authors how much they didn't like their book or things like that. And that's where it kind of gets to, you're welcome to your opinion, but not in my space. Like, I get to have a safe space here where I can talk about how much I love my book without somebody coming in and saying how much they don't like my book. You can
Yeah.
say that on Goodreads. You can say that on your own page. You can say that in your own space. And I think um, it's been very much kind of a back and forth over the last year. I've seen a lot more of it, of trying to help people to understand like the difference between those reader and author spaces and respecting them, because you have authors too who will go into a reader space and be very upset that they see, negative reviews. And it's like, well, but
Right.
you kind of put yourself into a situation where you've gone into somebody else's, you know, space. Like, even to a degree with Goodreads, like, I try not to read all of my reviews on Goodreads. It's very difficult because you want to know, like, you want to know what people are saying, but you do open yourself up to negative reviews by doing that. And you have to kind of tell yourself, like, this review wasn't meant for me to read. This review was meant for other readers who may, so that they can decide, is this a good fit or is it not a good fit? And my book won't be for everyone. And I have to kind of remind myself that, and so it definitely happens on both sides where you have authors going into reader spaces and getting upset, or you have readers coming into author spaces and having to be told like this is not the place for this. And so it's a very delicate balance. And I think, it's hard sometimes for people to kind of figure out where those lines are drawn. Um, because in general, like, we love to see good reviews, we love to see those things, but we're also human and love our stories and don't want to see, people talk badly about them. And so it's a very like delicate place. And I think like more and more authors are moving towards like just not wanting to see reviews at all because it's happening so frequently where they're getting tagged in negative things and stuff. And so that's super frustrating because it's like, but you want to see the good things and you want to see the people who love your work and be able to celebrate with them. But yeah, it's a very interesting space for sure.
Yeah. And I love how you describe it as different spaces for,
Mhm.
the author space and the reader space. I love that. And I think that there is an ability to, if I want to be a reader, I have to put my reader hat to go into the reader space, right? Like just because we're
Yeah.
authors, that doesn't mean we can't go into these spaces now. It's just
Yeah.
remember what lane you're in, remember what hat you're wearing while you're
Yeah.
there.
Yep, exactly. And not getting too upset if you see something. Because, I still follow lots of bookstagrammers myself, because I love to see their content. I love to see the books they're reviewing because I still want book recommendations, because I'm still an avid reader, but that does open me up to the possibility of if they happen to read my book and not like it and I follow them, I might see that, but it's not because that's not their fault per se. Like, I'm in their space at that point, and so it's kind of a needing to understand, like you said, like, which lane am I in? And, it's different when you get shoved into that lane. If someone like tags you in that negative review, then it's like, okay, well, you pulled me into your lane and I don't want to be here,
Yep.
but if you just happen to see it, it's not that reader's fault that you didn't like their book. You're in a reader space and you saw it, and it's going to happen. So I think it's a lot of just knowing which lane you're in and like wearing those hats and like being respectful of, the feelings of other people in terms of like 100% have your opinion, say whatever you want, but think about like, does the other person need to hear this or not? And do I need to tag them in it? And if it's negative, probably not. Like, and
Right.
it's just kind of having that like respect and like decency towards the author to like leave them out of it if it's not something that's, positive and stuff. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100% on you don't need to shove a negative review or down an author's throat. Like if
Yeah.
if it's something that you're passionate about, do it in your personal space, do it like you said on
Yep.
Goodreads, things that are appropriate for that. But and it's so crazy because like we see some of the big name authors still have this huge like negative fan base, or I guess it's not a fan base, it's like this negative space of people who dislike their
Yeah.
work, but thousands and thousands of people love it. But the haters, man, they go hard.
Yeah. And sometimes they're louder, and it's disheartening because even for those bigger authors, like, you see them and I'm like, I cannot imagine having thousands of people come at me and tell me that they hate my book. Like, that would just be so hard. And like, I can't even imagine having it be so, because you can't avoid it. It's everywhere and your books are on so many places, and it would be so hard for sure. So I definitely respect, those authors that are able to keep writing in the face of that when it's just like, I guess you have to just really focus on those positives and be like, but all these other people love it, so I'm going to keep writing for those people,
Yeah,
and but
I think that there is actually a craft to becoming a slow famous author because it gives you the like workup to having negative reviews. It gives you the workup to like
yeah,
dealing with public. It gives you like the slow entry of what you're going to deal with. Whereas
yeah,
people who publish their first book and it's like a banger and they go straight to fandom, like or
yeah,
famedom, it is a little bit jarring to suddenly have all of these opinions in your face.
yeah. Like it's kind of like that. As an author, it's kind of nice to have the slow burn versus the like,
We don't think it's nice at the time. Like, we're like, we just
right.
want it right now. We want to be out there. But looking back, I
Yeah.
imagine a lot of people who experience it very quickly are like, man, that was rough.
Yeah, I'm sure, because you go from like, this is my story and I love it, to like all of this opinion and all of these people, and you're like, oh wow, that's a lot to internalize and figure out, how do I sift through all of this? And it's a lot, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you mentioned so you don't promote other authors' books anymore on your Bookstagram, or how
So
does that work for you?
it's not so much that I don't promote other books. I don't review them. Like I don't give like star ratings and like do like a full like critical review like I used
Mm.
to back in the day, and stuff. But I still read a lot. And so when there are books that I love and authors that I love, um, I will still share those. Like I will put together, like I've gotten a little behind on a lot of that with my second book having just come out, like because there was so much focus on getting
That
that
was like
ready
this
and
week,
promoting.
wasn't it? Your second book?
Yeah, yeah, it just came out a couple days ago, and it's just been like a whirlwind of a couple of days. But I still love to share, like I'll be like, hey, like here's three recommendations of like my favorite, marriage of convenience books, or here's, this book that I just read and I love it. But I frame it more as like books that I recommend, and we'll talk about all the things that I love about them, but I'm not looking to try and critique them. I'm not rating them and telling people, this was only 3 stars because XYZ happened,
Mhm.
um, and stuff, and because, there are a lot of places where people can find those things. Again, they can go to Goodreads and find all of the ratings and reviews and different things. And, I still love to hype books and hype the authors that I love and everything. But again, just kind of transitioning that space of not wanting, because I'm friends with so many authors now and things, like I want my space to still be somewhere that's safe for them as an author
Mm.
myself, and so I don't want to, um, you know, be openly critiquing, another author's work and stuff. And it's just, it's a weird transition. It took a while to kind of figure out what that balance was and stuff, but I still love to promote other authors and talk about them. And like I did a whole bunch of giveaways this last week, and where I partnered with other authors to where we could, and they were all, because my most recent book is like set at Lake Tahoe in the snow and there's snowboarding. And so I partnered with like all these other authors that had like ski resort or like skiing or snowboarding, like romances, to kind of pair with them, to where we kind of were able to be like, hey, like if you like this, here's this. And like, here's, these kind of different options and stuff. So it was really fun. And I love to be able to, support authors that way, or just being able to read their books and talk about them, but without it being this like super hypercritical, I'm a book reviewer and here's all my opinions about what they did and um, stuff,
Isn't
because
that
that's just,
cool to
yeah,
be able to I love what you just said because you aren't competing with people who write books that are very similar to yours. It's not a competition with them. It's like it's if
right.
you like this book, you'll like my book. It becomes this network and this like spider web
Yeah.
of like I'm not trying to make sure I get in front of other people to stop them from seeing your book. I'm trying to connect with those people because they would also like my book.
Yep. Yeah, like I've seen around, like where people say like, like other authors, they're not your competition, they're your coworkers. So like how can you support each other to where like both of your books get seen. There are millions of readers out there. So if somebody reads their book, it's not a, oh, well, now they're not going to read my book. It's a, well, maybe if they liked their book, they will read mine, or, vice versa. And so definitely being able to find those connections within the community and say, hey, like we have, either a similar writing style or we write a similar like genre of books. And how can we take my following and your following and introduce them to something new, and kind of cross them over. So I think that's a big piece of the indie marketing, like our indie publishing world too, is connecting with those other authors to where you're not like you're not having to like reinvent the wheel in terms of like learning how to indie publish a book, because there's a lot that goes into it, but also just being able to say like, hey, like how can I build you up, and you're able to do the same, and we can partner with each other. And yeah, it's been just really fun. Like it was so fun this last week, like partnering with all these different authors, and just being like, hey, like we may not have necessarily the exact same readers, but now maybe they'll overlap a little bit more, and that gives you more opportunity to you know reach new people, and it gives me opportunity to reach new people. And at the end of the day, like that's what you want. Like you need to get your book in front of new people. So partnering with somebody who has a different, readership than you can be super helpful. Um,
And I
yeah,
feel like it also makes it a little bit easier on the reader too, because like, how many times has it been where you finished a book and you loved it and you want to jump into another world that's like it, but now you have to scour reviews, you have to scour the internet
yeah,
to find other books that are like it. But if the authors are already doing the work for you and they're already connecting with each other on different genres that are similar to theirs or books that are
yeah.
similar to theirs, like they're doing the work for you. You just pick up the next book in the line.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and that's where like Bookstagram and stuff is just so great, because you can see so many places where you can be like, I really liked this book, and this, reader, they really liked this book too. And then they read XYZ, so there's so much ability to find books that you would have never even discovered, and you get to find things outside your genre. Like I was not a fantasy reader at all. Like prior to Bookstagram, like I did not read fantasy, like outside of like Harry Potter and like Twilight, basically. Like in my younger years, like I didn't read fantasy, and I started reading fantasy when I joined Bookstagram, and like half of my bookshelf now is fantasy and romantasy and stuff where I'm like, wow, like really opened up my eyes to a whole different thing. And so I don't know, Bookstagram and like the book community, and I'm not personally on Book Talk, but I know a lot of people who are, that like same thing, like you're finding your people, you're finding new books that you may have never even knew were out there, and it's just really cool.
Yeah, I think it's funny because when Romantasy got really big and when like, Sarah J. Maas and all of these people who wrote these fantasy romantasy books, like a
Hmm.
lot of the fantasy people are getting so angry at like, oh, that's not actual fantasy. That's not, but it's also a gateway into fantasy. So many people
Hmm.
started with Romantasy, and being able to consume a fantasy world that isn't so fantastical, like, the deep
Right.
hardcore fantasy worlds, like that is a lot easier to transition into, and then it's like a gateway
Yeah.
into fantasy. And what
Yeah.
people don't realize, getting mad as a fantasy lover at the market expanding, like you realize now there's going to be new authors who are going to be writing in the fantasy genre. There's going to be new opportunities, and people are going to realize that this market's picking back up, so there's going to be new stuff for them down the line. Like the anger that comes from it, it's like you
Yeah.
realize this is only helping the thing you love, right?
Yeah, no, I agree. I've definitely seen some of that like discourse where, people are like, but it's not high fantasy and it's not, and I'm like, but it's still, like, and again, like you said, like it's a gateway of like it is definitely easier sometimes to start with a less intense version of fantasy, or like, and work your way
If I
into
could
some of
read
these
a
really intense books.
romantasy Lord of the Rings book first before jumping into like
Right? Because I mean, those books are like, there's a lot going on, and you've got to like really like be like, okay, what did I just miss? Like, I obviously wasn't paying attention. I missed like this one thing, and all of a sudden I have no idea what's going on. And so, I mean, like, yeah, like it's a good way to kind of like learn as you go into that genre, like how to follow these like super delicate and like super intricate plots where you're like, there's so much happening right now. Like, I remember like, I made like, it was like in my early Bookstagram, was reading from Blood and Ash, and it was like my first like real fantasy book, by
Oh,
Jennifer Armentrout.
I love that book.
Yes, like that series is so amazing. Me and my like book bestie like bonded over that series. Like I love it so much. But like I was
I've only
reading it.
started on the first book so far.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. But like I was reading it and I remember making this reel with like the sound effect was like, I think it was from Friends, and it's like Ross when he's like, at first I was like, ah, and then as I like had time to absorb it, I like understood or whatever, and I was like, yes, this
Yeah.
is how I feel about this book, where I'm like, I don't know what's happening, like what's going on, and then you like get further on and you're like, oh, I get it now, like it makes sense, but like when you've never read fantasy before, you're like, what is happening? Like, I have no clue what's going on. I don't know who any of these people are. I don't know where we are. I don't know when we are. Like, I
Yeah.
know nothing. And you just have to, like, you're just like, I'm just along for the ride at this point, and we're going to see
Like
where
this
we
first
go.
book is the manual of the world. That's it. There's no
Yep, exactly. And so it's just it's so different. And so I can understand like where some people like if they try and like jump into something that's like really, really intense, they're like, yeah, I'm out. Like this is I can't do this. So
Yep.
starting with something that's a little bit less intense, you can be like, okay, like there's a lot going on. I'm sure I will understand eventually. you know? Like, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I love
for
that.
sure.
No, I love you said it perfectly. So I love that you kind of started your writing experience with NaNoWriMo. What was that like with your first manuscript?
Yeah, so in case you have any listeners that don't know what NaNoWriMo is, because I definitely did not early on. So it's National Novel Writers Month, and it's the month of November. And so it's this like monthly challenge or this yearly challenge that they do in the month of November. And you're supposed to try and write every day for the month. And the if you like try and do like the full NaNoWriMo, you're supposed to try and write 50,000 words in a month, which is a lot of words. And so I just told myself like at that point I had probably about 13,000 words in my first book, On a Flight to Sydney. And I was like, okay, I'm going to just try and write every day. Like I wasn't like I've got to hit the 50,000 words, but I'm just going to write every day for the month of November, whether it's 100 words or several thousand words, we'll just see where we kind of end up. And so I committed to that and was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And so this was November of 2023. And so I just started writing, and every day it got a little bit easier and a little bit easier. And I prioritized it where like we took a family trip down to Disneyland, and like we'd get back like super late, and I would like sit in bed after like everybody else was asleep and be like, I have to at least write like 200 words. Like I just got to get something on the page so that I can say like, I wrote today, I did it. So it was very like, for me, it was very motivating. Like I've got to write today. Like I've got to get some words down. Um, and by the end of that first, of the month of November, I had a complete manuscript for my first book, and it was done. The first draft was done. And I was just like, wow, like, what do I do now? Like, what do I do with this? And so, but it was like, it was just so amazing to me to be like, at the very end, you type the end on something and you're like, I wrote a whole book. It was like 83,000 words. And it was just like, wow, like this is a whole book right here. Whether
Yeah.
anybody ever reads it, it's a whole book. like,
Yeah.
um, and it was just huge. That was so cool for me. And then so I was talking to my husband about it, and he had been really great like the whole month of November when I would just be like plugging away on my computer all the time. And I was like, I don't know, should I like what do I do now? And he was like, well, I mean, you wrote a whole book. Like, you should,
I have to tell it, that's what new parents feel like too. Like bringing home a baby,
yeah,
you're like, what do we do? We have this
what do I
baby.
do with this? Yes, that's exactly what it was. Kind of, I was like, I don't really know what the next steps are with this, you know? And I was like, I don't know, like, do I want other people to read this? Am I like, do I want to put myself out there? And he was like, well, I mean, you wrote a whole book. You should probably publish it. Like, not everybody can write a whole book. You know, I mean, technically, I guess anybody could if they really wanted to, but you have to sit down and you have to commit to it. And it's a process. Like, you can't just like one day just be like, I wrote a book. Like, you have to do all the work to get it there. And so he was like, you should do it. And I'm like, all right. And so it was like the next day I emailed my cover artist and I emailed my editor because they were people that I had friends that had worked with them. And I was like, these are the people I want on my team. I'm going to email them. And so like I emailed them and got them booked like in that week. And I was like, well, I'm committed now because I've like paid deposits on these
Yeah.
things. I'm like, I guess I'm going to publish a book now. Um, and just kind of jumped in with both feet and was like, all right, I will learn how to do this. And it was a lot of learning. It was a lot
Oh
for
yeah.
sure. You know, but I learned so much and it definitely was easier on the second time around because you learn so much on that first time. And it's a lot of just like faking it until you make it.
Yeah.
um,
I think it's so funny because like and now that I said that about the manuscript being a baby, it's so comparable to like your first kid, right? Like you want to
mhm,
be so protective of it. No, I can't cut that whole chapter. No, the like
yeah,
there's so many things that is comparable to that first book being you don't know exactly what you're doing, but then the second book you're like, yeah, okay, I can see where I need to cut that second chapter. I see where that
yeah,
character needs to be filled out more than what they are. Like you take criticism
yeah.
a little bit easier.
That's for sure. Like it definitely like that first like round of like feedback that you get back because like I did a round of beta readers with it, you know, and that the first round like when you start getting some of the feedback where people are like, I don't know about this or like this didn't feel like it really worked or you know this wasn't strong enough and you're like, no, it's perfect.
Yeah. Don't look at my ugly baby. Don't say that about my
Yeah, and it's like it's so funny like I think back now on like my first draft of my first book and being like, whew, like if I went back and read it, I would just be like, wow, that was fun.
cringy.
Like, what was I doing? Like, I didn't use dialogue tags. Like, I had like zero dialogue tags because, and when you write a first draft, you don't necessarily need them because you add those things. But like, you know, I like one of my like best friends, like she was reading it and she's like, who said this? Like, what are they doing? Like, what is, like, how did they say this? Like, where are your tags? And I was like, oh, yeah, yeah, I guess I need those things. Like, that's
It's
important.
not obvious.
Yeah. Like, you don't know what's happening here. Like, I know
I
what's
think you're
happening.
the problem, not me.
But it's just like, you learn those things as you go. And then, like, you get better. And, like, with my second book, I used dialogue tags appropriately throughout, like, even from the first draft, you know, because I actually, you know, as opposed to just like, I know what's happening in my head, so clearly everybody else should too. But yeah, it's such a learning curve. And I mean, even with that, like with my second book, I was literally going through my very last proofread and my editor had like made a note about something. And I was like, I mean, I know what that is, like, or I know like what's going on with that part. But I was like, I don't think I ever actually said it in the story because she was like, where is this person? And I was like, oh, like I never actually said what happened with that person. Like it's like the very last round of like no one else has said anything, and then she just like is like, so what about this? And I was like, I mean, I know what happened. It's in my head. I know it's there.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I should add that somewhere because that is kind of confusing if you don't know what happened to that person. And now you
Right.
do. But
Yeah. That's such a funny
um,
concept where like you have a room full of people and you've been like giving them all their spotlight saying different things, but if you like everyone went into a room and you're forgetting about Sally and you just don't mention Sally the whole time you're in this room, like no one knows Sally's in the room.
yeah, but like you know she's there, but like if
Yeah.
she like no one else would, you know, like it's really it's so bizarre like sometimes like the way that being an author is with stuff like that or like the way that I mean, you're the author, you're writing the things. And yet sometimes I'm like, my characters really went off script on this. And people are like, oh, but like you wrote them. And I'm like, well, yes, but this was not how this was supposed to work. Like, this was not where we were going. And now we're here. And I'm not sure how we got here. And they're like, but you wrote it. And I'm like, I know.
I think you really have to be an author to understand that, because I
Yeah,
think all the readers and people who don't write think we're crazy when we say that stuff. They're like, okay,
yeah.
they talk to you. How are they taking over control? Like, you're like, just believe me, they are.
Yeah, and it's just like it was so funny. So like I had completely written on a flight to Sydney. It was with my editor for its first like full round of edits. And I went snowboarding with my family and I was watching my husband snowboarding with my daughter and like trying to teach her, and it was just this like whole thing. And the second book I was already, kind of plotting it out and everything, and I knew it was going to be taking place up at Tahoe. There was going to be snowboarding. It was this kind of whole thing. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, my male main character for this needs to be a single dad." And I was like,
Oh.
and he's like in the first book, like he's in the first book. And I'm like, he needs to be a single dad. And I was like, oh, shoot. Okay. So I like send a message to my friend and I was like, so I think he needs to be a single dad. Is it too late for me to change this? And she was like, well, I mean, it depends on like how. And I was like, well, I mean, it doesn't change a lot for like this book, but I'm going to have to make changes because I have to incorporate a child for him
Yeah.
into this book now that he did not have, but he needs to be a single dad for his own book. And she's like, all right. So like I like had to go in and add it all, and like I cannot imagine how this book would have been if I had not done that. Like it would have been a completely different thing. Honestly, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as like um impactful. Like it's just like a completely different story than it ever could have been because he's a single dad instead of not. And it's just like things like that where I'm like, yeah, that wasn't supposed to go that way. And then just like this one day I was like, yeah, shoot, I'm gonna have to change that.
Yeah. I love that. I think
Yeah.
a lot of authors can relate to that, because like I was writing a story, got done with the whole first manuscript of the first book, started working on the second manuscript, and realized, oh shoot, there's an origin story that I need to tell before I even get to. So I had to go and start writing the origin story, and
Hmm.
now I'm going back and revising one and two because it makes a big difference.
Yep. Yeah. It's just so it's such a process, and especially when you write books that are interconnected, you go back, like it's hard because you have to really think about what you're writing now to make sure that you do properly set yourself up for what's next, because otherwise you're going, oh shoot, like I didn't include that, or I included something that I kind of want to change now but I can't because it's already published in this other
Yeah.
book.
Yep.
So it is like a whole, like I really respect my fantasy authors because I do not have that brain for like all of the things that you have to connect from book one to book however many there's going to be. And you see the way, these authors connect so much where it's like this little detail from like the first book that all of a sudden in like the eighth book makes this huge impact. And you're like, how did they do that? I don't
Yeah.
know. Like that's amazing. And so I'm always like, I I respect fantasy authors so much because my brain is like, I could not. I would get so lost in the weeds of trying to keep track of everything. So I'm always like so impressed with the fantasy authors. I'm like, this is amazing. I could not do this. My brain does not work this way.
My husband, he jokes all the time. He's like, if I were to write books, I wouldn't be able to like publish any of them until I was done with the whole series. Like I would
Yep.
need to know that there was nothing at
You'd
the
have to
end
have
that
it
impacted the
like,
beginning.
yep. That's how like, and I think part of it comes in, within like writing circles, you see people talk about like, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Like, are you just writing by the seat of your pants or do you plot like your whole book out? And my first book, I just pantsed the whole thing because I was just like, I'm going to write every day during NaNoWriMo and we're just going to see where we end up. And so I just pantsed the whole thing, which turned out great. And then I kind of went back and I had to make some adjustments to make sure that the plot actually flowed the way that it was supposed to. But, for the most part, like it worked out, thank goodness. But the second book was kind of a balance of the two where I like had some basic, I knew where the story was going. I knew the general outline of the plot. And then I just kind of, went from there. But you can't do that in fantasy. To like, you have to know where you're going. Otherwise, you can't tie all the pieces together to like have, and I'm just like, I don't think I could do that. Like, that's amazing.
Yep, I was similar to you. I started off very pantsy, and then I just morphed into, and now I'm the hugest outliner. Like I've got like several books outlined into the future that are like sitting
Mhm.
there ready to go, and I'm like, wow, I love outlining now. My ADHD brain is like, this structure is amazing.
Yeah, and I think like there's such good things on both sides. And like, as I am getting ready to work on the third book in this series, like there are some things where I'm like, okay, this one I'm probably going to have to outline more in terms of just because of the way the story is. Like, I'm going to need to know like where people are and when things are happening and everything. And so that one, and I think that'll help me because I'm a little overwhelmed at the prospect of that one right now, where I'm like, I think outlining it is going to help on that one a lot. Um, where I have like another one that's just kind of a standalone story that I'm working on, that I'm like, I'm just going to see where this goes. It's just going to be for
Yep.
fun and I'm going to enjoy it, and I will fix the plot holes later. Like, I'll come back
Yep.
and fix that
I'll
like
add a whole other
major.
person in.
I'll
Boop,
I'll add a
like you did.
whole nother person like right out of the blue and be like, oh yeah, that needs to be a person. There needs to be a person here, so it's fine.
Oh
Yeah,
gosh.
but
So,
yeah,
On a Flight to Sydney is your first book. Now, that
yes.
was the one you wrote last year, or is that the one that just came out?
No, so On a Flight to Sydney, here, like I can, like, so On a Flight to Sydney was my first, and it came out in August of 2024. So this was the one that I wrote during 2023, like NaNoWriMo.
Mm.
And so it came out last year. It was my first book, and I just love that book. It's been so fun to like see people love it. And yeah, so that's my first. And then my second is On the Slopes of Tahoe, and it just came out 2 days ago. So that one's like,
Yeah.
ah.
So what themes or what did tell us a little bit about the first book, On a Flight to Sydney?
Yeah, okay. So On a Flight to Sydney, it obviously takes place in Sydney, Australia. So that kind of came from like, I love to travel. I love to go different places. That's always been something that I've loved to do. And so I went to Sydney in college, and so that kind of inspired like the location of that. And so in On a Flight to Sydney, you have Wes, our male main character, and he is a US fighter pilot, or was. He no longer is when the story starts. So he's a US fighter pilot, and he is kind of running to Australia to get away from his past and what happened in the States and happened with his military career. And he pretty well literally crashes into Joss, who is a Australian flight attendant. And so, like on his flight, they have this neat collision of sorts, and it's just really fun. And it just really kind of starts them down this journey of like kind of a serendipitous, like they meet on this airplane and should probably never see each other again, but they do, and then they do, and then they end up being neighbors, which is just like, they're like, well, this is like, how is that even possible in like this giant city? I should never see you. And now we're neighbors. And they just have very different things that they are looking for, like out of their lives. They have very different like things that they think that they need. And it's really a story of like finding out that what you what you need is sometimes not what you're looking for. Like, you think you know what you're looking for and what you need, and sometimes it's completely not that. And so it's a story of healing. There's a lot of like healing and growth, but it's funny, and it falls kind of somewhere between like contemporary romance and rom-com. So you get the really funny, silly, like lighthearted moments between them, and then you also get, they have deeper backstories, a lot of like deeper kind of like background traumas that they have to deal with, and they really kind of work with each other as really good friends before they become more than that. And it's just a really like heartwarming story, and yeah, so that's that one, and it's my baby, and I love them, and it was just really fun to write. Like, they go surfing and they do fun like Sydney, Australia things, which is pretty cool. Like it was fun to include some of that and like being able to like tie in things and places I went when I was in college, and that's been really fun. So yeah.
Yeah. I like books where people can be like, yeah, I also kind of experienced some of the things I write about in here, so it's going to have more depth to it. That's some of my favorite
Yeah.
writing. So I can just imagine your excitement for it eventually becoming an audiobook with like I'm
Oh,
guessing there's Australian accents, so you're going to be able
yes.
to experience that.
I would love that so much because like I think like finding some like really great Australian narrators, like especially so like the first book, Joss, the female main characters are Australian, where Wes is American. But then for the second book, the main character, the male main character, he is Australian and the girl is from America. So like that book will be really fun with like an Australian male narrator. And I can just like imagine the accent, and it's just going to be someday it will be so good. That's like, I'm such a huge audiobook person that to get them on audio would be like an absolute dream because one, the accents, but two, just like to have them on audio for people like me who love to listen to audiobooks would be amazing.
Now, now the
Yeah.
second book is the people the main characters like are they like cameoed in the first book or do you introduce them in the first book and then they become the
Yeah.
main characters in the second?
Yeah, so for the second book, here, like so this is my second one. So
Oh, I
on the
love
slopes
the
of Tahoe.
cover.
So
I
it's
feel
like
like I've seen this
all the
before.
purple. It's so pretty. So the second book is about Breck and Rory. And so Rory is Wes from the first book, his younger sister, and Breck is Wes's best friend in Australia. So it's a brother's best friend romance. And so that one is, it's just really fun. And he is a single dad, and so you get kind of that. And so in that one, he is leaving Australia for a couple of months, and he takes his daughter and they go to Tahoe. And Rory, Wes's sister, is there to kind of help them get settled and help them to kind of figure out what they're doing while they're there. And he is leaving kind of some trauma behind of like a really bad breakup and situation with his daughter's like mom. And so they're kind of escaping to just be able to get away from that for a little bit. And Rory is kind of their landing place. And it's really fun. And I really was like nervous about writing Willow, who's the daughter, because I was like, I don't know how to write a child into a book. Like it
Especially a
feels,
romantasy like
yeah, because like
when do I
you're
leave
like,
her out of the scene? When do we
yeah,
find a
like
babysitter for her?
what is the balance of like wanting to like have her be like an integral part because this is his kid, but also wanting it to be, about the couple and stuff. So it is definitely a balance, but um she ended up being so much fun to write and stuff, and they just do so many fun things because it's Tahoe in the wintertime. So there's snowboarding, but then there's like ice skating and sledding and hot chocolate and just lots of like, it's very cozy and just a very, and but like with like a similar kind of vibe to the first one, where you get like the fun and the silly and the sweet, but you also get some of the deeper backstories and having to work through things and grow and change and figure out like, what does my life look like now, and how do I figure that out as a grown up and as an adult with a child, and that I've got to figure out all of these things. And
You
yeah,
mean
so
it's
there's just,
relatable to like people who are real and
yeah, and it's funny that you say that because that's like one of my main goals. Like when people will be like, "What is it that you want people to like take away from your book?" And I'm like, I want them to feel like there's this hope for themselves of like where like maybe you've had a really hard situation or you've had something really hard going on, and you can see where it feels like the happily ever after is like actually achievable. Because like I love an outlandish romance. I love it. They're so much fun to read, and you can read them and be like, there's no way this would ever happen in real life. But it was so fun to read, and I love those. But I love the ones that you feel like I could be friends with these people. This could be, my friends, like this could be my life. Like this is, it's real and it's genuine and it feels authentic, and you get to see all of the raw emotion and all of the relatable like hard things, but then you also get to see like the hope of like, this is how it could turn out, but it feels realistic too. Like you feel like you could relate to that ending. Um, and so that's kind of like, I want to write real characters that you just want to root for because you feel like they're your friends, like you're right there in it with them kind of the whole time.
Yeah, I love that. So these are on my TBR. I've written them down. This kind of like rom-com, like romance that is relatable. Those were some of my very first books that I got me back into reading after, being a kid and consuming the younger books. But
Hmm.
then as an adult, getting back into these books, their stories are so like inspiring, and like you said, the deep dark stuff happens, but then there's the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And I think that, there's just such a beautiful place for these stories and how to get people back into reading again.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think like being able to find hope in your books and find joy in places where, you're not going to be able to live every love story because that's like not realistic. You're going to have whatever love story you do have, and that's your story, and that's great. But being able to just experience different things, and that's the thing I love about books in general, like whether it's romance or fantasy or a thriller, because I don't really want to live in that genre, but
Right. No, thank you.
it's fun to like read, and you just get to live in these different worlds and these different experiences. And I think like as readers, you can really learn to be that much more empathetic too, because you can see the plight of so many different people in so many different walks of life and situations. And you're you just get to learn empathy in a different way, because you get to experience those things. um, I just think reading on the whole is just such a important part of life and can be so helpful to people in knowing how to relate to other people and knowing how to empathize. And yeah, like I love books.
Same girl.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to know where we can find these books online and where people can follow you to keep up with, what's coming up next and check out all the books that you recommend.
Yeah. So both books are on Amazon, so you can get them on Kindle Unlimited. They're on Kindle, and then the paperbacks are on Amazon as well. And I also sell, like, I have signed copies that come with swag and things like that through my Etsy site, which you can find like through my Instagram. I have a link tree there that has my Etsy, so you can get signed copies. And then they're also available on places like barnesandnoble.com. I'm not sure that On the Slopes of Tahoe is up on that yet. Like I just recently got everything updated for it to be able to go onto, wider retailers for the paperbacks. But I know Sydney is, and there are several different, smaller like indie bookstores, both online and in person, that carry them. If you have an indie bookstore that you love and you want it to carry it, like feel free to reach out and send me their info, and I will happily like reach out to them and be like, hey, like somebody asked if you could carry my book. Do you want to carry my book? Because I will happily, like, I love to work with indie bookstores. Um, and be able to have it, be accessible in that way for people that love to support indie bookstores too. So that's always a great option. And yeah, so that's kind of the gist of where you can find them. And for me, I'm on Instagram at the.sah, which stands for like stay at home, dot author mom. So it's kind of like the stay at home author mom. Um, and yeah, so I'm on Instagram. I'm not on TikTok, but if you want to talk about my books on TikTok, I would love that too. I just am not, I'm not on TikTok, but I do have that. And then I do have like a Facebook page, just as my, author, J.A. Forde, that has a lot of the same information that comes over kind of from Instagram. And I do have a newsletter that is linked like through my link tree, and I send, a newsletter every couple of weeks, sometimes just once a month, depending on kind of what's going on. I try not to flood people's inboxes with that either, but it's a good way to make sure that you don't miss things because, the algorithms and stuff out there are
Oh my
sometimes
gosh.
kind of
Yeah.
hard and you don't see the things you want to see. So that's always kind of the best, like, guaranteed way where you're going to be like, oh, it's in my inbox. I know exactly what's going on with this.
Yeah.
So yeah. And so Tahoe just came out, and I have a short story anthology that I partnered with some other authors on that's going to be coming out in June. So that one is up on Amazon for pre-order. It's called Heartstrings and Haunts at Hardscrabble, and it's kind of a mix of all kinds of genres. They're all short stories. So that one's going to be really fun. So it's coming out in June and it's up for pre-order on Amazon as well. So
Oh, fun. Those are so
yeah.
fun. They just like really like test your limits on can you tell a story very short and quickly and get all the points through that you need to.
Yeah, for sure. That was like very trying and was like a very good like growing experience of like, can I write this in 10,000 words or less?
Yeah. So
So, yeah.
I would love to kind of end this episode on giving people who feel like they don't have a story to write, but secretly maybe want to, or, maybe thinking about, is this something for me? What advice would you give them?
I would probably say like one, start like if becoming an author in some way is something that you even just a little bit like think sounds good, like start following other authors, start reading more authors, and just start getting more connected to those people to kind of see like, is this a community and a path that I can see myself on? Because I think that's a big, big help. And then I would say just write and just start putting pen to paper. It doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't even have to be good, like out the gate, like my like little like writing group of girls, like we always say like you can't edit a blank page, so like it doesn't have to be good on that first draft, on that first page, and even if you delete half of it, at least you had something to start with, you had somewhere to go. um and especially like even if you're never sure if you want to publish it, just getting those words out, it can be so cathartic and you can learn so much about yourself. And so I would really say, like, find your community, start finding people that are either in a similar place of like wanting to write and not being sure if they want to, or find authors that you really look up to and like would like to, talk to. There's so many authors that are willing to mentor and work with new authors. And so finding those people and then just doing it, just write. Don't let yourself overthink it too much, and just do it. And once you start, then you'll be able to figure out like, is this something I actually enjoy or is it not? And that's okay too. And then you can always back it up and say, you know what, that was a nice idea, I'm not going to do that. But
Thanks, but no
you
thanks.
yeah, but you might find that you love it and it turns into something that is just really amazing. So yeah.
I love that. That is a great final message. And I thank you so much for sharing your story, that the process of what you went through with the Bookstagram to, reviewing books to realizing that you like reading books and going deeper. That is a very interesting and lovely pathway to where you are now.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun. Like, I love just getting a chance to talk about books and talk about writing and everything. So, yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course, you were so fantastic. I cannot wait. Listeners, please go check her books out. Make sure that you let us know and let her know and give her some reviews and like and follow and do all the things. This was fantastic. Thank you so much for being on.
Absolutely. Thanks.
All right, guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Make sure you like, review it, and share it with all your book friends. We'll see you on the next one. Hey, guys, thanks for joining us on this episode of Lemons Listening Library. Remember, every story has a journey, and every journey deserves to be heard. Keep reading, keep writing, and keep listening.